DeShaun Tate back going live with you guys, recapping the game. Unfortunately, only one game in the NBA tonight. I guess I have too bad for everyone that's watching all of that football stuff, I guess as I like to call it. First game of the NFL football season. Texans and Chiefs, I think. I'm over here acting like I don't know. I think. But one monkey don't stop no show, and so of course you know that I have to continue doing what I'm doing and proceed with doing these recaps. So unless you don't know, of course you are watching the Final Buzzer with DeShaun Tate every night, Monday through Friday, that is 15 minutes or so after the final NBA playoff game concludes for the night. We do this recap, the Final Buzzer. Be sure, if you'd like to, or hoping that you already have, fingers crossed, toes crossed, eyes crossed, that you subscribe to Tate's Take the podcast. I like to call it the best, most educational, most informational, and most entertaining basketball content, basketball content on the planet in the form of a podcast. And make sure that you go and subscribe also where we stream live on YouTube, including make sure you follow along on social media, all social media platforms at Tate's Take Hoops, TATESTAKEHOOPS, where basketball lives. Now, let's jump right up into this thing because it ain't going to take much time to go through this. I'll let y'all get back to y'all football. Lakers take down the number 1 seed of Los Angeles Lakers, take down the number 4 seeded Houston Rockets 110-100 in game 4 of the Western Conference semis, and now LA leads 3-1. Let's start off with the winners. Not a whole lot to put out there right now. It's clear and apparent that the Los Angeles Lakers starting guard now in Rajon Rondo has been not only the difference maker clearly, and just trying to figure out exactly what it is that the Lakers have been missing. And apparently it's Rajon Rondo and his ability to shoot. Actually had another pretty good game for Rajon Rondo, especially on the offensive end. 11 points, 10 rebounds, 8 assists, a near triple-double for him. 5 for 8 from the field, 1 for 2 from 3, 50% from 3. That's pretty good if you're Rajon. There we go. That's pretty good. That's pretty good if you're Rajon Rondo, considering all things. But apparently what I've noticed is that clearly fans in the seats has been the biggest reason for his jump shot improvement, I guess, the fans not being in the seats. So this being a game that clearly just wasn't very close at all, didn't appear to be very competitive either, in which everything just seems stagnant. You know, if I am the Houston Rockets, just not a ton of ball movement like we're used to seeing, not a whole lot of competitiveness, if you will. And clearly the Los Angeles Lakers just had more energy than Houston did tonight. I was going to say, did they go out last night and have some fun? I hope not. They'll be breaking the protocol for being able to go outside of the bubble, but they obliterated the Houston Rockets from every facet in terms of the little things that typically most people don't pay attention to or jump off of the stat sheet, that being fast break points, that being points in the paint, that being second chance points, all of those things. And meanwhile, the Houston Rockets, I was kind of curious to know exactly how Russell Westbrook would capitalize on his game 3 performance, where he obviously had a good game, but this was just not the night for a lot of those particular players. And with saying all of that, I mean, you have one thing you have to consider with this team is that I expected that this thing could get ugly relatively quickly in a hurry, but that we still expected some competitive nature. Clearly, with head coach Mike D'Antoni, looks like he's going to be out of his way of that job pretty soon. 25 points for Westbrook tonight, 50% shooting from the field, 3 for 8 from 3. And just looking at it, not a good night tonight for James Harden. Yes, 21 points and 10 assists, 2 steals, good for him, 3 blocks, showing a little bit more effort defensively, but it clearly looks like it's taking away from him a little bit on the offensive end as well. 2 2 for 11 from the field and 1 for 6 from three is just not going to cut it. You need him to do a little bit more. And if you were expecting that this was going to be a team that can go into the Western Conference Finals and face, the stifling defense of the LA Clippers, you had another thing coming. I wasn't really sure how this system that Mike D'Antoni has put in place would be able to stand up and survive, especially after going 7 games against OKC, getting past the Lakers, and now going defensively up against the likes of Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, Pat Beverly, and a lot of those guys specifically on the perimeter end. But it looks like they won't come close to having that chance. And while we may rave about, James Harden's 21 points, 16 of them coming from the free throw line. So outside of that, when you're talking about just shooting percentages, which I don't, the free throws are obviously not included. You're talking about 5 points for James Harden tonight. That's not something that is going to get it done. They need a little bit more help and assistance. And I don't think that Daniel House is necessarily the solution or the answer to that issue. When you're talking about the Lakers, who didn't even have a good game from some of their guys, nor from three-point range, where they shot 30% from three, obviously only missing 1 free throw throughout the course of the game is something that helped them significantly, but still uncertain as to what the excuse is, considering the fact that LeBron James didn't have to have a good game. I mean, 16 points, yes, 15 rebounds and 9 assists, a near triple-double. Yet still 7 for 17, from the field, and 0 for 5 from three, and you're pretty much getting your brains beat in basically the entire game. So that being something that kind of sticks out like a sore thumb to me, that if you want to be able to carry on and win this game or win this series in stylish fashion, it's not something that the Lakers necessarily have to get caught up in doing. When Anthony Davis obviously had a good game, and Caruso had a good game as well, and a couple others, but they looked like they were sleepwalking, especially after 3.5 quarters. And I know that, Houston was making a little bit of a comeback, if you still want to call it that, I guess. But it appeared to me that there was a combination of them finally hitting shots where it was too little too late, and the Lakers were kind of taking their foot off the gas just a little bit. So that's just kind of what I have in regards to that. Interestingly enough, James Harden didn't see the floor nearly as often, where, he had 4 fouls in the first half. And while that was their Achilles heel, it's still not an excuse, because you do have Russell Westbrook there. That is the whole point of having that second star player there, to be able to give some production and some major contribution scoring to this team. But he can't be the only one, and guys just were not hitting shots. Rivers actually did a pretty good job, to be Rivers, and I give him credit for his 14 points and what he brought to the table. But there just didn't. It seemed like their energy had just been like sucked out of them, not just from probably stemming some from the OKC series, still playing every night. You go from that series playing 7 games all the way into now you got to meet up with LeBron and AD and big players, and I think that's why a lot of their energy that they had exerted just is completely been erased from them. And speaking of erased, it won't be long until they are erased from the playoffs, because they only have 1 more game to go, essentially. And Mike D'Antoni, I heard him speak a little bit in at the half, and kind of saying, we have to compete more on defense. And one thing I was trying to figure out is, are you surprised? And I'm not surprised the least bit, because that's not what this system was to be put in place. This is an offensive firepower system. I told people over and over what the problem was with the Houston Rockets, and that's being one-dimensional. When the shots are falling like they were in game 1, that's one thing. But it wasn't that long ago that they missed 27 straight threes in a game against Golden State, and they're just one of those teams, and clearly one of those players between James Harden and Russell Westbrook. While I do give them credit for competitive nature and being, explosive and athletes, and James Harden being arguably or inarguably the best, offensive player, or going to go down as the best offensive player that we've ever seen in this game. Yet still, the issue is going to be that sometimes I think these guys are more focused in their attention, trying to wrap themselves around what they're going to wear in post-game press conferences and so forth in terms of it being a fashion show than it is more important to go out there and play basketball. And that's one of the concerns that I have with those players with this team. And sometimes there's always going to be an era where there are star players that keep you away from getting a championship. We've seen it with Jordan. We've seen it with Kobe. We've seen it with, KD, Steph, and those guys. And we're obviously seeing it with LeBron / Kawhi Leonard. And there's really not a whole lot that these guys can do about it. So from that standpoint, I'm not surprised of the fact that I'm surprised by Mike D'Antoni's, comments and saying what he said in terms of, we have to get better on the defensive end. You know that you did not put this together to be a defensive team. It is built around offense. And when you put yourselves in situations where you live by the three and you die by the three, they're dying by that. And when you're one dimensional, that just can't be anything worthy of a recipe for success. Exactly what it is a recipe for disaster. And I think that that's kind of what they're facing, and that they're going to have to really look forward to some different coaching options if they want to put themselves back in position. Because to be honest with you, while Denver, yes, is good, and we know about the Clippers and the Lakers being at the forefront of the Western Conference coming into the season, I still like to think that Houston should have had enough for sure, especially having Capella in their lineup for as long as they did. And then afterwards to be able to make those adjustments, which is essentially what those head coaches are making all the big bucks for. I'd feel cheated a little bit if I was a player for the Houston Rockets, because what are we doing? You can't be successful when you don't have any size in the lineup. When Jeff Green, Robert Covington, and PJ Tucker and those guys are your center, and for what it's worth, I guess Tyson Chandler, whenever he gets into the game, which is hardly ever, probably as much as I get into the game, then it's just something that's not going to work out because you don't have nearly enough. And eventually that size starts to weigh in on you. If this was a one and done March Madness situation, that's where I think that something like this can be successful, because you don't need to be better than the other team or as big in terms of size and height as the other team in a 7-game series. You just have to do it for one game. But this is not that. And if it was a one-game scenario, then the Lakers will be out and the Rockets will be in. But that's not the case. The Rockets won their first game. They haven't won another game since. I don't think that they will win another game. I had this one going 6. And while it could, I just realistically, based on the body language that we've seen tonight from the Houston Rockets, I don't realistically see that happening going forward when the game is played, I guess, on Saturday night. So that's that. And that's that for our recap. I won't get you guys back to football. Think about it. I might watch a little bit of it myself. Probably the first time that this recap has actually been done in like 13 minutes. So not a whole lot to cover here. I mean, that's pretty much the gist of it. Looking forward to Game 7. Speaking of Game 7s, on tomorrow night between the number 2 seeded Toronto Raptors, who is the reigning NBA champions, and they have an opportunity after tomorrow night to say that they are still the defending champions. I guess they still would be until somebody wins the whole thing, but they won't have that opportunity to call themselves that very long if they lose this game tomorrow to the number 3 seeded Boston Celtics, who have had more than enough opportunities to close out this series. And you don't want to close your eyes out on Toronto just yet, because they are a team that can certainly win this game. And if I'm Brad Stevens, this one has really got to sting if I can't win that game. So looking forward to that one tomorrow night, as well as the Denver Nuggets in the nightcap game of the doubleheader, who will be taking on the number 2 seeded LA Clippers. So a doubleheader of 2 versus 3 seeded matchups, and looking forward to that. I think tomorrow I'm going to go with, as much as I want Denver to win that game, I think I'm just going to go with the Clippers. And I think Boston has a really good shot at closing this thing out. But yet still, Toronto is just going to be so hard, so tough to beat out. And so I'm really kind of 50-50 on that one. Remember to go and subscribe to Tate's Take the Podcast anywhere you find your favorite podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Red Circle, the whole nine. Also streaming live and always on YouTube. So be sure to subscribe to that as well. Last but certainly not least, be sure to follow along on all social media platforms at Tate's Take Hoops, TATES TAKEHOOPS, hashtag where basketball lives. See you guys tomorrow around midnight.